Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider from Kates-Boylston. Each episode features conversations about emerging trends and news that affect the death care industry. We talk to people who understand the delicate balance of change in a profession and vocation steeped in tradition. This week, I'm speaking with my colleague Stan Goldstein. He is the editor of American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, and together we're going to do a year in review where we talk over some of the top stories of the year that one of us have covered or that we liked in the magazine. I ran a similar thing in the last issue of Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter, at the end of 2023. Click the link in the show notes and you'll be able to get to that issue, which is free to everyone. And our hope is that if you read this issue, you see what we're doing and want to be a part of it. If you're unfamiliar, FSI is a weekly newsletter for funeral service professionals. We're doing real news every week as a kind of supplement to what they're doing at American Funeral Director, which is our flagship magazine, and at American Cemetery and Cremation. So without further ado, here is Stan. Make sure you stay after for the closing credits and hello into 2024. All right, so each year you put together put together a list of your favorite stories or the stories that you think were the most important for the year 2023. And I thought as the new year starts or the old year ends, it'd be great just to talk about some of those stories and to drive people to maybe take a look at the magazine, visit the website, and look at some of these stories. So let's start. What's your first story that you want to talk about for 2023?
I'll talk about something I wrote for American Funeral Director magazine. It actually wasn't my first idea for the story. I contacted Bill Villanova. He's the president of the Frankie Campbell Funeral Parlor in New York City. And they're very well known. They handle like every major big name who has died in New York, from Joan Rivers, Judy Garland, Donald Trump's first wife, and just like they're the funeral home in New York City.
Yeah.
And I followed them on Instagram and I saw they had done some renovations. So I was talking about the renovations, and this was back in June or so. He's like, oh, well, we're not going to be finished till December. I said, oh, and then I'm looking at his Instagram and I see he was on the TV show HBO's Succession. And I had never watched the show before, but I was like, oh, look at this. So all of a sudden, I started binge watching Succession. And it was 4 seasons, and the last season was this year. And the second to last episode, there's a big funeral scene, and there he is running the funeral in the episode. So I got a nice story out of that and talked to him about the filming and everything. And it was interesting because he said HBO wanted to be very accurate. So they talked to him and they made sure everything looked like exactly how a funeral would be done. And that one surprised me. And then I had to binge watch Succession off for 4 seasons. Gave me something to do. So.
And what I thought was really cool about that story was it was like by the time he gave him the list of everything that they would have to do, they're like, you know what, why don't you do it? And we'll just film you doing it rather than hire actors to do what you just told us, because it seems so, because the minutia, people don't realize, I think, the minutia that comes with getting a funeral just right. And telling someone how to do it is much different than doing it for 30 years and then just doing it again.
Exactly. And they filmed one day at a cemetery in the Bronx, and they had him and his crew there for that also. And so he was there for 2 days. So he enjoyed even though they're this big time New York City funeral home, he enjoyed his 40 minutes of fame, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's the cool thing, one of the differences between between New York and California has always been like, in New York everybody thinks they're too cool to look at celebrities, so they
Yeah,
so celebrities can kind of move around kind of freer, is
yeah,
the rumor. But getting the chance to be one for a little bit must have been super cool, because I mean they get a lot of attention anyway.
yeah. And another interesting story I wrote. This was in the beginning of the year, January. I had written about a funeral director in Tennessee, and she called me out of the blue, and she said, "I handled Loretta Lynn's funeral, and I have permission from the family to talk to you about it."
That is so
Like,
cool.
yeah, I was like, "Well, thank you." It was just nice. And again, the important part is the family was okay with it.
Right.
And she gave me all the details of how the pre-need was set up, how they got the call, how they handled it, how they dressed her, who dressed her. And it just was a real interesting story, it turned out. And Tony, it's nice the contacts we made that over the years that people look to you and give you a call out of the blue and say, "Hey, maybe you want to write about this." And it was like, yeah, I definitely would. Right.
Yeah, no, that is super cool. And what I loved about the story was they had like spy moves and stuff that they had to do. They snuck out to her house, and they, you know, very, very quietly, took the body back to the funeral home. And it was all they had to see. Would they have a secret passcode for when it happened? Was that?
Yeah. Yeah. Code words they did because they were prepared for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of thing is fantastic. And at the risk of doing a commercial, I probably should have said this before, and I'll probably say it in the introduction now that I mention it. These are all still up online, so if you're a subscriber, you can read these stories. If you're a new subscriber, you can still read these stories online. Um, and that's the wonderful thing about having these archives is, we've got all these great stories kind of lined up. You've been big in the funerals of the famous over the last several years. And one of the little kind of inside baseball things is, when someone dies, just the question is, can we get appropriate access without being, you know, TMZ? And I
Right.
think you're really good at that.
Oh, thanks. The interesting part is, and we've talked about this in our meetings, a lot of these famous people dying don't have public memorials anymore, public funerals. I mean, Rosalind Cotter was great to watch the funeral, and it was a
Mhm.
very moving, was on for about 2 hours. And it was just very moving to see the first ladies together like that. But if you think about it, we had Queen Elizabeth and I believe Lisa Marie Presley when she died this past year. My coworker Patty wrote about that, and that was interesting. But you look at the list of the celebrities who have died this year, and not many of them had public memorial services. Nothing for Barbara Walters, nothing for Tony Bennett. I could go on and on. So it was just nice to see the ceremony yesterday on TV because I think we need more of that. It's sad that a lot of it doesn't happen anymore or publicly anyway.
Yeah, I think some of it might have to do with, in if you're big enough, it doesn't, with control.
Mm,
Without with social media, they can't control the way that the funeral's portrayed in the way they could, even a decade ago. But we write a lot of, we do a lot of the older stars and all the older Hollywood stars and things like that, where it's just a couple photographers and half of them were on the payroll anyway, so it wasn't like some kid was going to show up with a cell phone and catch someone napping, like literally kind of dozing off, and make that the headline story instead of the death. I think that has something to do with it.
right. And who knew that I could get Bruce Springsteen in a story in American Funeral Director
If
magazine this
if
year?
anyone could, it would be you, Stan.
I was looking on social media, and Bruce had a show in Orlando, Florida, in February. And when Bruce was walking through the crowd, some guy gave him a big margarita and he drank it. Then all of a sudden, I'm reading the article. It's from a local newspaper in Massachusetts, and it goes, funeral director Rob Dwyer of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I went, whoa. So I reached out to him and I got a story about him and talked about his funeral home also. But you never know. That's what we're always looking for too. These human interest stories with funeral directors, and there's a lot out there. It surprises you sometimes what you can find.
One of the things that surprises me almost as much is when you call the funeral director and they're like, "Oh yeah, I guess it didn't occur to me." So many of these stories, when we call people, they're surprised that we want to talk to them. When of course we want to talk to them. That's one of the things that we do.
Yeah, and one story I was able to do. This was in our February issue. Was on Annette Morch Greer, and she runs what's called Roberta's House in Baltimore, and it's this community service building that she started. Her family, she grew up in a funeral home. She is a funeral director, and her family has one of the biggest funeral homes in Baltimore. But it was just, I had a chance to go out there and visit, and it's just fascinating to see the hard work she had put in. And it's this community outreach center that has so many different programs. Another thing I keep saying, it was very, very rewarding to visit with her and to write about what she has done and what she can offer to the community.
Now we met her at we being you, because I didn't meet her at NFDA, right, when it was in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, yeah, that was in October of 2022, and then I went out there that day to visit her facility, and then we wrote about her in the February issue of 2023 of American Funeral Director.
And you got some great photos, because a lot of times that's the harder the job. Your job is harder because you need photos, and I don't. So I don't have to worry about if I can get photos before I write the story. I write the story and then I put a headshot and pow, 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 I'm done. But you've got to find or take photos. Yeah. And there were a lot of great photos in that. Those were your photos, right?
Hey, iPhones work great. That's what I tell people. The other thing, people send us photos sometimes, but we need high res because we print in color in a magazine and they don't understand it. It's hard. I say, take an iPhone photo. It works great. And a simple iPhone photo works wonderful.
Yeah, I have a story I'm working on now, and I asked for photos, and he texted them to me, and I'm like, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to get better photos than that.
Yeah. And then Patty actually wrote about this, but I knew it was interesting to see someone I had written about, Justin from Parting Stone, and he was on Shark Tank, Justin Crow. They're out in New Mexico, and he was on Shark Tank this year, and I actually saw him at the NFDA convention in Las Vegas in September, and he got a $400,000 grant, or not a grant's the wrong word, but investment. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. From two of the sharks. And it was just really nice to see someone who I'd interviewed before talk. It's like, oh, I know him. There he is on Shark Tank.
6 degrees of separation. You just became an answer on 6 degrees of separation. Because there was a famous person on the show, right? Was it Gwyneth Paltrow or somebody?
Yeah, I believe so. It was one. She didn't give him the offer, but she was one of the sharks, I believe, that night. And then you would know this better than me. There was people from, was it Washington State, that were on for natural organic reduction, and they didn't get a offer.
Right. Their return home. If I can talk about one of my stories this year, I did a story about a woman, about a funeral director who helped a man get NOR. He was terminal. He had some horrible disease. And she had been at a presentation that a bunch of the NOR companies had given. Was the one that Taylor Johnson was the funeral director's name. That was the NOR company that impressed her the most. This year, Kates-Boylston is hosting 8 can't-miss virtual events for funeral professionals. The 2024 lineup has timely topics like technology, pre-need, revenue growth, memorialization, and more. We're kicking our first one off this February 29th, 1 to 4 p.m. It's the Technology Think Tank. It's going to cover how to integrate systems into your daily operations, how to advance your digital roadmap, how to streamline internal processes, and, as always, how to better serve your families. What I like about the virtual format is that it makes it easy to participate and to network with fellow funeral professionals while never leaving your funeral home or business. But if you can't make it, you still can register. And if you register, you can still watch the whole video and get everything you would have gotten. And the speakers always tend to leave their emails for follow-up questions later on. Register now for this free event by visiting the show notes of this podcast or the events section of our website, www.kates-boylston.com, where you'll get all the details of the full 2024 virtual events schedule. Invest in your success today.
And on the cemetery end, Tony, some of the stories I enjoyed writing about for American Cemetery and Cremation magazine. Who knew I'd be writing a story about geese in a cemetery in Iowa? But it was a fascinating story. They had two geese. One of them died, a male geese, and the female geese was very lonely, and they could tell she missed her partner. So they put out, the cemetery manager put out on Facebook an ad for a date looking for a partner.
That's great.
And, they found one, somebody else who had a male goose, I guess, the way you say it, and they matched them up together. They came in the cemetery, and now they're like husband and wife at the cemetery. So, and I guess offbeat stories. That story got a lot of publicity. It was featured on CBS News, and it was in USA Today, the Washington Post. Different ones sort of went viral. So that was pretty interesting. And
well, geese are cool. Animals are cool. People like fun animal stories. I mean, the news can be so awful. As that sometimes a nice story about a goose finding love is just what you need, you know.
And then who knew people find recipes on tombstones in the cemetery? And that was another story. It did. That a woman out in California, she just started a few years ago, and now she's found 25 different recipes on tombstones. She hasn't visited them all in person. She's been to about 8 of them, but she makes the recipes, every one. So, and other people are sending them into her. And she's had a couple articles in the New York Times written on her. Her name's Rosie Grant, and she lives in Los Angeles.
And my wife follows her on TikTok. She hipped me to that, and you know, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know all the cool stuff that's going on. So this was the one time I'm like, yeah, I know, we're all over it.
Yeah. I think she has 190,000 followers on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's it. And then with that, a friend of mine who was the tour guide at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, she does something called Hollywood Recipe, or Hollywood Kitchen. I'm sorry, that's what it's called, Hollywood Kitchen. And she finds from old cookbooks where celebrities had recipes, and she does a YouTube series of making like Marilyn Monroe's cheese lasagna, Lucille Ball's walnut crisp, Judy Garland's vegetable salad.
Yeah.
And what she did, Estelle Getty, who was best known for being on the Golden Girls, is she's buried at Hollywood Forever. And on her 100th birthday, they Carrie Bible, that's her name, the tour guide, she set up where they were always eating cheesecake on the Golden Girls. So she did have permission from the cemetery. It was okay. And they had a cheesecake party right by Estelle Getty's grave. So back in July. So
that's great. What I recall from that story was that she was kind of aware that, you know, maybe, you know, they were some of the recipes were written by
writers
or whatever. Yeah. But she also there were some that she knew, right? Because like the descendants came and wasn't there one where like somebody's son or daughter came and cooked with her? Yeah,
she heard from was it Lou Costello or somebody? She's heard from family members and stuff. So you never know what people come up with on things. Then we got to pick what we call our ACE Award, the American Cemetery Excellence Award, sort of a cemetery of the year. And in our December issue is Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. And talk about, you know, the thing with cemeteries, they want people to come visit. They want their parks. They come out, have a picnic there. And Congressional has over 200 events a year, all kinds of different things, even a bad art day where they just said, just make what you want. And no matter how bad it is, we don't care. And come together.
And the thing about the cemeteries, and I think this links to the other stories as well, as, you know, they are places for contemplation. So if you go you come up with ideas like, oh my God, there's a recipe. I should make that recipe, or let me look into this person and their biography and see what their whole life was about. And I think that, especially as we move toward this kind of, post burial future, cemeteries are working really, really hard to, they're putting up columbaria, they're making scattering gardens, but they're also making it so people just come to keep it alive. Back in November, I went to a cemetery cleaning in a public interstate park.
Hmm.
And what was interesting to me about that was this idea that people still want to tend the graves. These are people they don't know, people they never knew, but we have this sense that if we find graves untended, we have some sort of responsibility to honor the fact that the person was put there, even if we don't know who they are.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories like that. I've written a few of those. One here in New Jersey where the woman just said to me, they're part of my family now. I need to take care of them. And
Yeah,
people get attached to it. Absolutely. So
that's fantastic. So what else you got for me?
I went, I wrote about this is in our December issue of American Cemetery and Cremation. Wrote about the North Burial Ground in Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island. Been around for like 350 years, and fascinating cemetery director there. She does a great job. And what she told me too, I found interesting. She loves looking at the old epitaphs because of what they say. And it just gives her an idea of what it was like to be living in the 1700s or the 1800s. And, it's one of those, you never know what you might discover in a cemetery, all the fascinating things there. And then more cemeteries too are doing these, the stories behind the graves where they have actors and actresses come in and dress up as the characters. And one I liked in Milwaukee, of course, famous for beer, they had the famous breweries, Mr. Schlitz and Mr.
Yeah.
Paps, and they dressed up by their graves and they told the stories of their companies. And there's all different, you see different cemeteries having those type of things. And I think what I hear more and more too, they want you to, they don't want cemeteries to still be thought of as these scary places.
Yeah.
As we just said, they want it to be known. These are nice parks. Come on in, take a break, walk around our lakes, check out our scenery, check out our graves. We have all kinds of historic tours of the different graves here and everything. And even Congressional Cemetery in DC, you go on their website, they have 20 different tours with all types of themes of the notables buried there. And you don't even, it's virtual too. You can just sit back and look at it. So that's always fascinating to me. I think that's great.
Very cool. And you got anything else? What else you got?
I'm trying to think. No, it's been a fun year. I enjoy featuring people. I enjoyed writing stories about funeral directors. You may get it too when you tell people what you do and they don't quite understand. And you're like, no, we profile different funeral directors, different cemeteries. There's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of great people. And that's what I always enjoy doing these nice features. And you're finding that out too. Oh, I should mention you started FSI, the podcast this year too.
Yeah. We didn't talk about this, and if you don't want to, you don't have to, but you did get to write a personal story this year. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I will talk about that because it ties into something. My mother passed away in February. She was 95. And, we write about funeral homes and funeral directors and cemeteries. And here I saw it firsthand. And I did write a first person article. And I did, in that article, showed some of the negative. I should say this 99.5% of the people who reached out to me were great and everything. But a couple, which I mentioned in the story, one, a real good college friend of mine, when my mother passed away, I'd pre-written something up for Facebook. She died in the morning. We expected it, and that she had been in hospice. And I posted it on Facebook, and I had a friend call me right away. And this was literally 40 minutes after my mother had died. And he said he was sorry. And then he just started talking about another friend of his who died and their family and what the family's going through. And I'm just sitting there going, I can't listen to this. I just
Yeah.
other, and it just, I brought that out to just show, it's not the time to talk about somebody else and then somebody else's family to that. And I had a couple other different things, but mostly it was very, very, very interesting to see it. What here I am sitting down with a funeral director and making arrangements when we talk about that so much, and then going to the cemetery and things like that. Following up on that, I was in Atlantic City for the New Jersey State Funeral Directors Association convention in October, and they had a woman speak. Her name's Sherry Dunleavy, who will be featured in the December issue of American Funeral Director magazine. And she talked about what is the right thing to say, that a lot of people don't know what is the right thing to say. And it was interesting. She's written a book about what do you say to somebody. And she found she had a baby who died after about a month, about 20 years ago. And she found some of her closest friends avoided her. And she thought, because they didn't know what to say or how
Yeah.
to act. So she goes through and she says, and a lot of people say this after someone they know of a friend, a relative they know that dies, and they say, "Let me, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know." And she said that's the wrong thing to say because you're putting it on that person. It's like you offered to do something, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
she actually had I don't know if it's a funny story, but it's also though, if you do offer to do something, you should. She told the story of someone who she reached out to one of her aunts, said, "If I can ever do anything for you, let me know." And she said, "Yeah, I may need a ride sometime." So this woman's husband had died, and her car wouldn't start one day. So she said, "Oh, can you take me to work at about 11 o'clock? I don't have my car doesn't work." And the aunt said, "No, I can't do that. The price is right at that time, and I never miss it." So it's like it's just unbelievable. So,
Yeah.
and the point is just if you say you will do something, you do have to do something. But I found that interesting because I don't think a lot of us know what the right thing to say is at a time like that. And in my circumstances, like I said, I pointed out in the article 3 different things that I found strange, but on the most part, everybody was good. I sometimes wonder if I should have pointed out those bad things because most of it was very, very nice from
Well,
people.
it's interesting because it's one of those things like when you buy a new car, you see that car everywhere. And since your story, more and more I see people I interview are talking about, that's the thing now. Like, how do you talk to a grieving person? How do you, you know, not avoid them and not hurt their feelings? How do you let them? And it is something that people are are interested in. So I think it's important to say that, these things happen and it's not mean. It's just like so insensitive, and it's not on purpose. It's just that people don't know. People get nervous talking to someone who's just
Yeah,
lost someone and they don't know what to do. So they just run off at the mouth sometimes.
yeah. My mother had told me a story. My father died in 1985, and I remember this. A good friend of hers called her, said she was sorry, and then went on to tell my mother about how her cat had died, and went on and on and on about how much she missed her cat. And this was 2 days after my father died. So
Yeah.
it was like, yeah, it's like there are things to do, and I think people have to realize it's the person whose mourning's time, and you just say, "I'm sorry." I'm thinking of him. If you have a story to relate about the person, but it's not the time to start telling the person who's in mourning about your problems. That's
Yeah.
the wrong time.
All right. Well, we will tie it off there, and happy New Year.
Happy New Year! Thank you.
All right. And
Thank you for having me on. I'm very honored, Tony. Thank you
oh,
so
I'm
much.
sorry. One last thing. You have a book.
Oh, I do have a book. It's called Rock and Roll Tour, the Jersey Shore. I live in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, right by Asbury Park, and Bruce Springsteen is just about everything here. He still lives in the area, and where Beatles fans visit London and Liverpool to see Beatles sites, and Elvis fans go to Memphis to see the Elvis sites. A lot of Bruce Springsteen fans come to the Jersey Shore to see the Bruce Springsteen sites. And I have a book out that has all the locations and a lot of the history of the different sites around here. And yeah, a lot of visitors, a lot of people from all over the world come to Asbury Park and this area to see the Bruce Springsteen historic sites.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Stan.
All right, Tony. Thank you so much.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Please subscribe wherever you're listening. We see the subscriptions growing, and we're so happy, and welcome to all of our new listeners. And make sure to tell your friends. We would love to have them listen as well. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please check out the show notes. There you will find a link to the Funeral Service Insider Year in Review column. It's long and it goes month by month and talks about some of the highlights in some of the months, pulling stories only from Funeral Service Insider. See what you think of it. I think you'll like it, and I hope that you'll consider subscribing. And that is it. There is no post-mortem this week because it is the new year and we're starting fresh. This is coming out the morning of January 1st. So nothing has happened yet this year, and I don't want to keep it that way, but hopefully more nice will happen than not. Have a happy new year, and here's to a great 2024, and we will see you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.